we're going to cut open this central body cavity. We're assuming these are the gills, so the heart is going to be in this general vicinity. The kidney is going to be along the spine. The air bladder is going to be right underneath it, and then we'll get into our stomach and intestines, and we'll see if the gonads are in here. Fish have 2 openings, but this one was cut, so you can't really see those 2 openings very well because it's been already cut open. You can see the lateral line really well. I didn't mention that on the external. I should have. It's a really nice, easy to spot lateral line. So I'm going to try and cut from wherever the urogenital pore is, which is usually behind the anus, from this back fin. Each of these fins has a little bit of a bone girdle, which makes it more difficult to cut. So I'm going to cut back up to roughly the lateral line, and then across to the operculum, and then cut down. I'm going to try and see, when they recommend doing this, they recommend cutting underneath this fin, but I kind of want to get into that heart cavity. I find the small cuts don't show quite as much. So I'm going to have to flip them over so I can do this. Or flip her over, I have no idea. In cutting, you can really see the scales really well. I wonder if I can get a few up for you. So they're very thin, and they're mostly see-through. And if I put one on my glove, it almost disappears because my gloves are wet. And it's the same refraction as water. But teleost fish have the ctenoid scales, not all teleost fish, the perch have the ctenoid scales. So I'm trying to cut through the muscle of the wall without cutting too much else. It's kind of the opposite of when you fillet a fish. When you fillet a fish, you're trying to cut the muscle and leave the guts behind. And then this one, I'm trying to cut through that gut wall and ignore the muscle, because it's, when you're looking at the internal bits, the muscle is a little bit boring. I can feel that rib cage. So I'm erring on the side of caution, cutting quite a bit of muscle as well as, because I like to have more room to see what's going on. And here I've got to, here I'll show you guys that. I've got to the fin, and I can see the heart underneath down in here. So I'm going to try and cut up this way through that muscle and through that fin. I've got a nice sharp scalpel. But so there's the main body cavity. Let's cut. I might cut this off too. So starting down in here, underneath the gills, the heart is down in there. So maybe we'll open it up so we can see that a little bit better. This is all just bone. Okay, so let's look for where the gills are. The gills are there. Are you still on screen? Sorry. Gills are there, so if I cut into the skull a little bit, I can maybe break off the operculum. So you can see the gills. Let's bring that up. So there are 4 rows of gills on each side. And while they do have this cartilaginous arch on the inside, it's not nearly as strong or defined as the shark one, which means without water, the gills will collapse. And that's ultimately why fish suffocate outside of water. Is like they do struggle to get oxygen, but we have oxygen, and they can live off the air oxygen for a little while, but because their gills all collapse, they're dealing with way less surface area. So I'm going to try and cut away this so we can get more into the heart. So you can see, because this guy is preserved and died, all those efferent blood coming from the gills into the heart is seeped out into the body cavity of this guy. Or girl. I haven't looked at his gonads yet. Okay, to try and make this right side up for you. Coming out of, from the heart, so mouth, right, where's a probe? So this is, the mouth comes into, this is the oral cavity in here. Can you guys see my probe way down in there? So that's the oral cavity, goes past the gills. And then means the stomach is up here, but this yellow one is probably the liver. This is the stomach. It's pretty easy to tell because it has all these little ceca, pyloric ceca, these little finger extensions. One of those might be the pancreas, and one of them might be the spleen, depending on the system. You can see the air bladder up here. That's this white, looks like a deflated, half deflated balloon. This is probably the gonad down here, which would mean it's probably a male, because the female ones are usually larger. I'm looking at the other side, because each side shows things a little bit better. Maybe we can pull out the intestines. And there's all that mesentery sort of holding everything together. Oh, sorry guys. You can sometimes pull that mesentery apart and pull the intestine right out. And then it's a little bit more obvious, that stomach with all the pyloric ceca on it. And then fish are carnivores, so they don't really have a ton of intestines. Or guts. So there's 2 gonads. And the spleen and pancreas are usually attached right near the stomach. I'm struggling to tell what's polaric cecum and what's pancreas and what's spleen. I don't know. This is definitely the liver, this yellow thing, which means there's probably a gallbladder up in here somewhere. This is one of the smaller creatures that we dissect, so it's harder. But you can clearly see the 2 exit pores on this specimen, which is nice. The gonads are going to a different exit than the anus. The kidney will be up under the swim bladder, right up against the spine. So that's probably kidney up in there. Oh, sorry, that's probably kidney up in there. Yeah, that's the kidney. So it's a little bit darker on this specimen, and like I can feel the spine bone right above it, and the ribs. And that swim bladder's quite large. There should be a urinary bladder in here that I'm not seeing. So the stomach with the polaric ceca are always really interesting to me. Yeah, the urinary bladder should be just like back here. The diagrams are always so much easier to tell. This is the heart. There's so much blood on this specimen, it's hard to tell where the heart, the parts of the heart. That there's just like this mess. We were looking at how the shark, the deoxygenated blood comes from the body into the sinus venosus, into the atria, and then into the ventricle of the heart. The ventricle of the heart is easy to tell because it's like hard muscle. But then the atria is always floppy and more difficult to find. Okay, so let's do this close up. There's the heart, and it's mostly the ventricle that we're seeing. The atria is probably that floppy thing on the side there. And then it's a bulbous arteriosus, not a conus arteriosus. So the conus arteriosus of the shark has valves, the bulbous arteriosus does not. Liver is really easy to spot. Big, floppy. Probably has a gallbladder attached to it, but this is such a small specimen, it's hard to see. Swim bladder's easy, looks like a deflated balloon here. Pretty easy. The kidneys back here along the spine. And then we've got 2 gonads leading to the urogenital pore. There should also be a ureter, and a urinary bladder coming from that same pore, but I'm not finding it. I'm not quite sure. Then a second pore with the anus, all the intestines, so many intestines, but way less than us. carnivores don't need as much intestines as omnivores. And then we have our stomach with all the and then we have our stomach with all the caloric ceca. So that's the esophagus and the stomach. It's got that sort of weird shape to it. Once again, I'm not quite sure where the pancreas and the spleen are. In my memory, one of these caloric ceca is actually a pancreas, but I might be misremembering that. And the spleen should be like a dark thing coming off of the stomach, and I'm not seeing that. So, sorry guys, it's hard to hold it in the right spot. But I've got a second one, so I might cut it open and see what happens.